Over 1 billion people across the world rely on a caffeine fix to get through their day. Here in East Timor, 1/4 of the population depend on coffee for their survival and income.
Last year, there was lots of coffee. There's not so much this season. And when there's not much coffee, we suffer. We don't have enough money to send our kids to school.
In the remote hillsides of this tiny Southeast Asian nation, coffee has been cultivated for centuries. Now Starbucks and global consumers are hooked on these green coffee beans, which produce a popular organic blend.
If you drink Colombian coffees or Central American coffees or South American coffees or African coffees for a period of time and then you come back to Timor and you drink Timorese coffee, it's almost like drinking hot chocolate.
This cash crop provides hope for a poor, war-ravaged nation where farming and doing business remains a grinding pursuit. I'm AMBROSE. On this edition of 101 East, we ask, can coffee rejuvenate East Timor? In East Timor's wild surrounds, coffee thrives in the highest altitudes. The misty, spectacular landscape takes your breath away. But so can farming this rugged terrain. Okay, no worries. I'm following Justino to his small coffee farm. And take it from me, this 59-year-old moves fast through the forest. I got a tick. Might need a bit of help. Thanks, mate. Obrigado. 80% of the population scrape a living from subsistence farming. It doesn't feel like a plantation or a farm, but up in these hills we're on the hunt for what the East Timorese call the Golden Prince. That's because coffee is the prime cash crop in this poverty-stricken country, worth $10 million last year. Justino's half-acre is a typical plot, a few shrubs under massive shade trees.
We
go around and pick the red cherries, and we wait for 8 days. And then we pick the green ones because they will have ripened by then.
Picking coffee is no easy feat when your trees are on a vertical slope. Justino earns up to $27 a day, filling 2 bags with red ripe cherries containing green coffee beans.
This is a good quality cherry, so you've got 2 green beans. That unripe one only has 1 bean. The beans are Arabica coffee, and it has a great aroma.
46,000 farming families depend on coffee for 6 months of seasonal work. Most, like Justino, sell their cherries to coffee production plants operated by COOPERATIVA Cafe Timor. American coffee chain Starbucks will buy over 60% of their beans this season.
We may be a small player, but big clients are buying our Arabica coffee for its different taste, including Starbucks. They like the aroma, its thickness and blackness.
This tiny country produces less than 1% of the world's coffee, but it brews a boutique blend. Timorese Arabica is considered one of the best organic coffees in the world because it's grown in pesticide and chemical-free soils.
When you compare us with other coffee-producing nations like Colombia, Brazil, and Africa, Timor-Leste is tiny. So how do they know about Timorese coffee? It's only because of our careful preparation and the support of the International Organic Certification.
Cooperativa Cafe Timor is the biggest coffee producer here, but depends on foreign aid agencies to improve farmers' skills and provide local employment.
We have farmers working with coffee who don't know how to do it properly. We help them get access to the market and produce coffee that meets international standards. And one factory alone employs 500 to 700 people for 5 months.
Hello, Mr. President. AMBROSE from Al Jazeera. Thank you very much for this interview. East Timor's newly elected president, TAUR MATAN RUAK, believes increasing coffee production can develop the region's poorest nation.
Infelizmente, a economia de Timor depende em 92%.
92% of East Timor's economy depends on our oil and gas reserves. It's not sustainable long term, so our country needs to diversify. And one way is by developing other sectors, like coffee.
This year, farmers like JUSTINO face a bad season. The crop is small and international prices are low. The family normally stores bags of coffee as insurance during hard times, but now they've run out.
The old coffee we put aside is gone. The kids have to come out of school. We've all got to get out there and pick it all so that it doesn't drop from the trees.
Unpredictable weather can cause coffee harvests to drop by half. Last year, drought damaged crops. JUSTINO fears heavy rain this season could stretch until August.
When there's a big rain, the fruit falls off, especially if it showers with strong winds. You can lose the entire lot. If you are lazy, you don't get anything. If we don't clear the weeds, we won't have the crop we have today. And we live or die by coffee.
Despite the hardship, coffee has a long history here among these picturesque hills. It's a little rundown, but the old architecture from when East Timor was a Portuguese colony is still quite impressive. It was during that period, back in the early 1800s, that coffee was first introduced here. Coffee became the biggest trade item until Indonesian occupation in 1975. In the next 2 decades, 180,000 Timorese were killed. The invading army monopolised the coffee industry, displacing farmers and stealing their crops. Farms became battlefields, the beans' quality and price plummeted. At the time, TAUR MATAN RUAK led the guerrilla resistance against Indonesia.
Around 80 to 90% of the plantations were affected. There was destruction on the city's outskirts, which left us worried. But the fields survived, and the locals started to take care of them again.
In 1999, East Timor gained independence in a violent referendum. Shannon French was part of a foreign peacekeeping force that came to stabilise the fledgling nation.
Because the farmers were too scared to go near their crops and their land, these things they got left unattended, so plantations went wild. We didn't know, like when we got the coffee, we could have been taking home potatoes. We used to chop the stuff down and didn't know what a coffee tree looked like.
While fighting militia loyal to Indonesia on the border, his Australian platoon discovered the local coffee.
We had a hectic patrolling schedule and the locals would come out with coffee and just give it to us, and say, here guys, sort of like a thank you in a way, and we knew that they had nothing, we knew that they'd been a terrible time. It was such a kind gesture just to taste it and sit there and to have that coffee was that little piece of, sort of tranquility.
Since then, Shannon and 3 former soldiers set up a small-scale company which sells the coffee to cafes back home. He says while coffee is a competitive game, it's also a way of giving back.
It's important for us to leave a legacy here, you know, like it's very cathartic for me to be back here doing this. You look back even say a year ago what our plans were to what's happening now, you know, naive is probably an understatement. You know, so it is a hard industry, it is a ruthless industry, you know, competing with, you know, these big corporations and people that just really put the squeeze on you. They don't care about where the coffee comes from, they just care about the price. Oh, good.
Shannon has given a coffee processor to one family he met during his deployment.
This is where the red cherries go in there.
He hopes it can be the first of many, as farmers can triple their profits by processing dry coffee instead of just selling the cherries.
Well, I think that they get to determine a bit more where they're going with their coffee, who they sell it to, a different option. They're not sort of like corralled into this one avenue.
So next week, do they want to come down into Dili?
I don't know if coffee's going to solve, you know, poverty or anything like that, but it's going to give these guys a lifestyle where they don't have to, you know, struggle from year to year.
Our ancestors gave us 10 fingers and 10 toes to use. When there's no coffee in a bad year, we've got to make things out of steel. We've got to clear our fields and plant corn and cassava.
It's the hungry season in East Timor, when food from last year's crops is running out, and the next harvest has yet to yield. ELVIRA, who lives in one of the country's poorest districts, says food shortages last for months.
It's difficult for us because the land is not good. We can't create rice paddies. It's okay when there's income from the coffee, but the money runs out.
Her village collectively pick coffee, but don't have the machinery or proper roads to get it to market, leading some to resort to primitive measures.
Pounding the dry coffee with wood is different to using the machines. A lot of the beans get split. Some villagers around here use the old methods. The quality and amount of beans lessens, and we don't get much money.
Hector Hill is trying to break the cycle of hunger. A small-scale coffee producer, he buys cherries at higher prices than market value from small-scale farmers like ELVIRA. Farmers may manage almost the entire coffee crop, but few, he says, can depend on it for a solid income.
You know, at present, most farmers they're basically selling their crop at a loss. You know, if you come in and you do some analysis of the labour that they put in, of the time that it takes them, under anybody's way of doing an analysis of it, the money that they get back for it at the end of the day, they've lost money.
His brew, using the local beans, has a sweet chocolate flavour. But communities like ELVIRA's earn as little as $200 for a season's work. Supply chains from the farmer to overseas consumers are large, with the beans being resold up to 6 times through middlemen.
The farmers aren't capturing any of the value chain. It's the buyer who buys the cherry that's capturing parts of the value chain, and all the farmer is getting is from his tree till he sells his cherry.
He says East Timor should get small farmers like ELVIRA more involved in the production process.
The model that you see in Central and South America, and that you see in Africa in some areas, where groups of families, so extended families, set up depulping and washing facilities that they own collectively. That enables them to produce a reasonable quality parchment coffee, which they could then sell to a buyer down in Dili and get more money for it. That would immediately kind of increase the income that they get from their coffee and reduce the amount of losses due to damage.
Some farmers have access to such modern equipment through commercial buyers like TIMORCORP. The company's manager, James Rutherford, is not happy with this season's crops. There's too many green and damaged cherries. Farmers who pick quantity, not quality, are his biggest headache. But he says they're really hurting themselves.
Because the green bean is not ready to come off the tree, it's going to damage the tree. And on a coffee branch, it will only bear coffee 2 times from the same place. And that's it. So if you've damaged it the first time, the second crop you're not going to get. So it makes a huge impact from top to bottom, quality-wise and yield-wise.
TIMORCORP rely on small-scale farmers, but they lack the education or training to maximise yields. More cherries grow on younger or pruned shrubs, but farmers rarely prune out of fear it will damage next year's crop. Instead, they let coffee trees grow tall, with some dating back to colonial times.
They're getting it off trees that are very, very old, yields that anywhere else in the world are ridiculous. Looking around and what other countries have managed to achieve with their smallholder farmers, the Timorese, with some tree management practices, very basic, would not cost them any money, they could triple their yields.
TIMORCORP has built a new factory with state-of-the-art machinery that will sort the good beans from the bad.
Well, this is the newest facility in Timor, all brand new equipment, and this will handle a crop of about...
It won't improve yields, but could produce a better blend that will fetch a higher price on the international market.
We have relied on hand sorting and that in the past, but it takes too long and costs too much.
Still, both farmers and companies remain trapped in a system that needs desperate revamping.
Coffee is pretty much the only export that this country has currently. People need work. The coffee industry can provide the work. And the less people we have migrating to the cities where there is no work anyway, the better for the country.
Critics say it's time for East Timor to stand on its own 2 feet. Since independence, a UN mission played a major security and administration role, but that ended this year. Today, there's widespread unemployment, which is worsening as a largely young population move to the capital Dili with few skills.
The tendency is to run to the city and abandon the countryside. In our case, it's important to develop rural areas so that we can avoid the overpopulation of one city. 25% of the population live in Dili.
The government has a 20-year plan to transform this country of predominantly poor subsistence farmers into a middle-income market economy. But imports are 9 times higher than exports.
Our biggest challenge is developing manpower and human resources. Without it, you can't develop the other areas. Singapore is one example. It has no oil or gas, no agriculture, but they are the most developed of any Asian country. East Timor is so far from there.
There's plenty of diverse land here to grow a variety of crops. But generations of farming knowledge was lost during the Indonesian occupation. Only 2% of the national budget is spent improving agriculture, so farms are poorly run.
If you look at the staple crops, corn and rice in this country, East Timor has some of the lowest yields in the whole of Asia. And yields are as low as some of the parts in Africa. And that's the biggest challenge, is raising that food production on farm so that farmers can feed themselves. This is a pivotal time for Timor, and partly because the population is increasing so rapidly. Now we have 1.1 million Timorese. Within 20-30 years, we'll have twice that number.
Rob Williams works with the government to provide communities with drought-resistant seeds of superior genetic quality. His aid-funded organisation, Seeds of Life, has seen staple crop yields increase by 40%. But local resistance to modern methods remain.
Timor is unique in that there's a very cultural activity producing food. Farming is a very cultural activity. It's associated with the spirits of the land, spirits of the sacred houses. There's not the easy options of recommending sprayings, recommending fertiliser, recommending things that you can buy at the shop.
To navigate those issues, the group encouraged farmers to build better storage facilities and use root vegetables as natural alternatives for fertiliser. But some communities he visits want tools that produce quicker results.
Every rice farmer will ask me for a tractor. Once he's convinced that I'm not going to give him a tractor, he asks for a knapsack sprayer and insecticide to kill rice bug. Farmers know what's good for them and we need to follow their lead.
Ego LEMOS disagrees. Like many locals, he views industrial agriculture practices with suspicion. Like his idols Bob Dylan and Bob Marley, the renowned folk artist uses music to spread his message. Farmers here sing songs to rouse the buffalo. His lyrics stress the importance of maintaining traditional farming.
East Timor is a small island, small country. As soon as we polluted the water, we polluted the soil, we pollute the air, we destroy the ecosystem in the area. If you use fertilizer and pesticide, you're also killing the microorganism in the soil itself.
A qualified permaculturalist, Ego says East Timor should look at a return to a more self-sustaining approach. He says yields could improve with better composting, using local traditional crops and improving soil fertility.
I think better government need to think of helping the farmers to grow enough for themselves instead of selling the food to someone else. Organic coffee is great and it's very tasty, but it's mostly creates slave. I think better they have to mix crop and diversify their crop so that they can have coffee to sell, they have food to eat, and otherwise they only rely on coffee, they can't eat coffee.
He's also critical of foreign aid agencies taking the lead in developing and diversifying East Timor's agriculture base. For decades, the Portuguese, Indonesians and UN made decisions for East Timor. Now Ego says it's time for the people to decide how to farm their country.
You know, I can see from the beginning of UN arrived in Timor 2000 till now, they invest a lot of money in agriculture. Till today, 90% we still import rice. We still import food from overseas. For the long term, Timorese people have to decide which way to go so that we're not depending all the time on the aid.
Coffee accounts for 90% of non-oil trade here. Its success stems from organic subsistence farming, a way of life close to the Timorese heart. But the President believes it's time to think with the head.
For years, East Timor lived off the back of subsistence farming. Now it's difficult to maintain. There's pressure from imported goods and foreign competition. Organic products have no real chance of competing. We need to introduce pesticides to make this country grow as we wish it to. I think that's the greatest challenge, because on one hand our country wants organic agriculture, but we need to increase productivity and competitiveness.
Coffee represents more than wealth in East Timor. It's a survival against the odds story after a brutal occupation and war. Like farming, coffee cultivation needs to embrace new strategies so this young agrarian nation thrives and not just survives.